Hello, everyone. Today, my group, including Nicolas, Samantha, Brianna, Daniela, Karina, and myself, Nikisa, will be discussing the relationship between negotiations and culture. Culture is defined as a series of socially broadcasted behavior patterns, norms, beliefs, and values of a given community. As a result of the heightened diversity and greater interconnectedness present within the international business arena, it is crucial for negotiators, regardless of experience, to comprehend their counterpart's culture in order to bypass the negative effects of stereotyping alike one's respective cultural lens. Therefore, the following analysis will facilitate a framework to investigate the correlation between international business negotiations and various Hofstede cultural dimensions, alongside the degree of communication, cultural intelligence, and trust between concessors. The theory of the problem solving approach, or PSA, encompasses the concept of reciprocity, defining the custom of exchanging positive responses contingent upon an adversary's behavior. Therefore, a negotiator's ability to generate mutually beneficial agreements, as highlighted by the PSA analysis, is moderately connected with the collectivism individualism dimension. Moreover, it was uncovered that collectivist societies depict a heightened level of PSA given their desire for fortified relationships. Contrastingly, the egocentric interest of individualistic characters deteriorates the ability to generate integrative agreements. Furthermore, individualism hinders cooperation through maximizing the negative effects of a counterpart's PSA and thus diminishing positive reciprocity. Opposingly, given the collectivist's desire to maintain amicable relationships, cooperation is harbored, hence furthering value creation. Therefore, collectivist communities are naturally predisposed to reciprocity and ameliorated PSA. Subsequently, the dimension equally exerts an effect on integrative agreements as a strong positive correlation exists between collectivist societies and augmented joint profits. Primarily, a strong positive correlation was evident between a collectivist seller's ability to generate profits, while the effects were insignificant upon analyzing buyer's collectivism. Correspondingly, in regard to communication tactics, it was clear that collectivist sellers are strongly associated with the utilization of questions, bundled concessions, and value creation as primary tactics. Contrastingly, buyer's collectivism is moderately connected with the augmented implementation of integrative strategies. Following, negotiators must note the positive relationship between a collectivist seller soliciting data, alike the creation of value, and vice versa. In addition, discussing each party's effect on behavior, a collectivist seller traditionally stimulates buyers minimizing information sharing and marginally augmented inquiries. Opposingly, collectivist buyers dealing with collectivist sellers results in the vendor's heightened use of distributive methodologies. Lastly, a seller from a collectivist society generally leads to shared revenues, while a collectivist buyer displays diverging effects on common earnings. The results indicate the important lesson for negotiators, as sellers are increasingly reliant on buyers, influencing the desire for an integrative outcome, hence augmenting value creation. Likewise, it is important to note that increased collectivism maintained by buyers exerts an adverse result, as sellers may discontinue information sharing in search for personal benefits. Subsequently, Nicolas will touch on the dimension of masculinity versus femininity.
Thank you, Nikisa. Moving on, there are significant differences between how a masculine culture negotiates versus how a more feminine one does. Masculine cultures, for example, tend to be characterized by ego-enhancing strategies. These type of negotiators ultimately aim at achieving their goal through little or no compromise towards their counterparts. As a result, masculine cultures tend to use assertive and competitive strategies, extensively reinforcing control and power throughout the negotiation. Consequently, cultures that lean towards the more masculine side will usually use a distributive approach to the negotiation, aiming for a win-lose agreement. On the contrary, a more feminine culture is characterized by relationship enhancing strategies, striving to achieving a win-win agreement that benefits both parties equally. These negotiators reach agreements by resolving conflicts with the use of cooperation and mutual concessions. Now, passing it on to Karina.
In terms of power distance and negotiation, the relationship is solely based on the status of negotiators. In countries with a low PDI score, the status within a person isn't fixed and tend to use a more cooperative negotiation style. However, there is a big difference between the levels of employment in high PDI nations. Inequality is common where the superior has all the power to make decisions. Regarding selecting the negotiation team, low PDI nations likely select members due to the appropriate skill set the employees portray, whereas in high PDI countries, it is solely based on the personnel status. Moreover, when negotiating the two indexes, several challenges arise. As high PDI nations are dependable towards their superior, loyalty plays a vital role. If a high authority figure performs an unethical task, it is common to see employees staying loyal to the superior rather than reporting them. In other terms, the scenario in low PDI countries would see this as unethical behavior. Therefore, companies must do the appropriate research before negotiating with another nation to avoid unnecessary problems. Now, moving on to Samantha.
Thank you. Now we will analyze the impact uncertainty avoidance has on negotiation styles. High uncertainty avoidance negotiators employ cooperative negotiating methods to achieve and maintain good relations with the opposite party. These cultures are stricter in regards to negotiations, using rules and regulations as a means to guide them through the process. Furthermore, said group thoroughly plans prior to negotiating to avoid any business risks. The preference for consultative in-group decision processes alongside deductive drawing conclusions based on a set of general principles are employed while negotiating. On the other hand, low uncertainty avoidant cultures utilize a competitive approach, participating in riskier negotiations where time pressures are present. They are ambitious and appreciate a more relaxed atmosphere within negotiations where surprises are always welcomed. Furthermore, these types of negotiators employ independent decision making and inductive reasoning influenced by persuasion in order to reach a final conclusion. All factors considered, it is crucial that negotiators understand that negotiating differences caused by uncertainty avoidance prior to doing business in order for success. Now, moving on to Daniela.
Thank you, Samantha. Moving on with communication styles. Within a society, high and low context culture play a significant role in how negotiators perceive the subtle behavior of the other group. The difference between these two contexts is intended to draw attention to the distinction in verbal and nonverbal communication. On one side, Edward Hall stated that a high context communication or message is one in which most of the information is either in the physical context or internalized in the person, while very little is in the coded, explicit, or transmitted part of the message. On the other side, low context messages require to be transparent so that there is no possibility of misunderstanding. And if a message is not specific enough, the communication process will be delayed. As an example, a study comparing negotiations between American and Chinese joint ventures identified Americans as members of high context cultures and Chinese as members of low context cultures. The study explained that American negotiators respect openness and directness, which with little concern for sacred context, while Chinese negotiators are less likely to share their views freely and directly and to take a legalistic approach to achieve their goals. Now, moving on to Nicolas.
Thank you, Daniela. We can separate negotiators into two groups: those who prefer having ambiguous, implicit agreements, or those who prefer having explicit contracts with clear guidelines. Implicit negotiators prefer the use of broad language when producing a contract, using it only as a rough guideline. They strongly believe that having a definitive agreement is too rigid with no room for flexibility, therefore impeding their ability to explore unexpected opportunities that might arise throughout the negotiation. In fact, many times, written contracts are never signed. Instead, oral contracts may surface. On the contrary, those with uncertainty avoiding cultures will disapprove of ambiguous negotiations, emphasizing the importance of stringent contracts that clearly outline what the relationship between the two parties will be. This is done in order to provide stability and to mitigate risk. Consequently, transparency is highly valued and expected throughout the negotiations of an explicit agreement. Now, I'll pass it on to Brianna.
And now we're going to be discussing cultural intelligence in regards to negotiations. Cultural intelligence, or CQ, plays a key role in effective intercultural negotiations. It is an individual's ability to comprehend contexts that are unfamiliar to them and consists of metacognitive, cognitive, motivational, and behavioral elements. Individuals who have a high CQ have the ability to change more seamlessly between negotiation styles to work with the counterpart's culture. With a high CQ, individuals are able to adapt to different situations of cultural diversity, where there is more motivation and willingness to work cooperatively during a negotiation to create higher joint gains. During a two-party negotiation, those that have high behavioral, metacognitive, as well as motivational CQ will participate in more integrative negotiations and utilize integrative tactics. This is due to the fact that they have psychological skills and characteristics that allows them to understand the other party and have the compassion to want to come to a joint agreement that works for both individuals. Three types of cultures in corresponding countries in connection with negotiations will now be discussed. The first is dignity cultures, with the United States being a perfect example. Self-worth in this culture is based on an assessment of personal goals and values, as well as by meeting the standards and achieving the goals that are set. In the American dignity culture, negotiators had decreased competitive aspirations, but relied more on information sharing in regard to interest and priorities, as this allows for the creation of more accurate insight and higher joint gains. As well, they worked more cooperatively. Individuals approach negotiations with a problem-solving mindset, meaning working cooperatively with even the possibility of compromising. Next, individuals from face cultures, with China being an example, don't act in self-interest, but instead fulfill obligations that are dictated by social groups. Individuals satisfy these obligations as it allows them to maintain social harmony and stability. Face is seen as self-worth based on other individuals' assessment on whether a person is fulfilling the stable social role obligations, which is also dependent on the individual's status within the social hierarchies. Individuals from face cultures during negotiations exhibited higher competitive aspirations as well as more reliance on influence compared to dignity cultures. This is due to the fact that individuals are worried about maintaining their self-worth as well as trying to obtain a higher status than what they may currently have. Lastly, in honor cultures, with Qatar being an example, self-worth is about one's reputation as well as their assessment of the opinions of others. A cooperative or competitive social interaction is based on if an individual feels that their reputations are being threatened. Negotiators from Qatar demonstrated competitive aspirations and a heavy reliance on influence, whereby they used more aggressive motives. Individuals approach negotiations with a mindset to win, as this increases status, even at the expense of their counterpart. Due to this, many approach and view conflict as a way for them to defend their honor, which results in competitive and aggressive behavior. In conclusion, CQ provides individuals with cooperative motives, which aids in understanding and overcoming intercultural differences during negotiations, especially in regard to dignity, face, and honor cultures. Thus, this creates an effective intercultural integrative negotiation. Now moving on to Karina, who will be discussing trust and negotiations.
Throughout negotiations, it is frequently viewed that parties mirror the opponent's behavior. However, circumstances change if both parties portray some sort of trust within each other. Although the concept of trust is promising, it portrays numerous barriers in which all regard to the negotiation phases. Primarily, as every culture has a unique interpretation of what trust really means to them, the meaning of trust can be delivered in three central forms, which includes interpersonal trust, perceived trust, and trust propensity, which directly affects the pre-negotiation phase, yet poses various issues. To elaborate, the problem with interpersonal trust is that an individual's intention may be an essential factor in negotiation, however, it is not the only element that should be considered. Next, the factors included in perceived trust may not be universal, which pose several issues when discussing trust within other nations. Lastly, the belief in trusting one another varies per culture. Research indicates that non-Western countries trust their counterpart 25.5% more than Western countries, therefore signifying that every culture has a different level of trust, most likely due to external variables. Moreover, in terms of the effects of trust, this is seen during the negotiation phase. Studies claim that individuals should focus on assurance rather than trust. Similarly, the same countries might portray characteristics within tight versus loose cultures, whereas tight cultures rely more on assurance and loose cultures rely on interpersonal trust, hence demonstrating that even though negotiators may have trust, the effect is different in every nation. Lastly, virtual negotiation plays a vital role in all three negotiation phases. The use of virtual negotiation may be advantageous in some cases, however, for the most part, it portrays various drawbacks. This includes miscommunication, hostile behavior, and less motivation to develop trust. Likewise, in most intercultural negotiations, virtual communication is standard. However, in other nations, people may not be as comfortable using technology or oppose the idea of virtual interactions. All factors considered, trust plays a vital part in the negotiation. Therefore, it is essential to note what fundamental research needs to be conducted before negotiating with the counterpart. Now, moving on to Daniela.
Thank you, Karina. Continuing with the correlation between culture and negotiations. International negotiators seek to understand culture as it significantly impacts how people perceive, interact, and act. Culture, as a way of communication, is an imperative connection to have between two parties while negotiating, and therefore should be placed at the core of any international engagement. Moreover, culture is one of the most powerful and influential factors when determining the distinctiveness and efficacy of any communication. Many cultural variables affect a member's expectations, behavior, and responses. It should be observed throughout the clothing, expression, gesture, and/or punctuality during a negotiation. For instance, for Germans, the lack of punctuality is a sign of poor organization and of bad manners, while for Spanish is a sign of prestige in business. In summary, the negotiation process includes different elements such as individuals involved, topics discussed, parties represented, and most significantly, the context in which they are negotiating. It is important to keep in mind that even though culture is complex and difficult to comprehend, it has to be present in international business negotiation. Now, passing it on to Samantha for the final conclusion.
Thank you. All factors considered, culture significantly affects negotiations, as shown by the relationship between international business negotiations and various dimensions, like the degree of communication, cultural intelligence, and trust between concessors. As a result, it is crucial for international businessmen to acknowledge the different negotiating styles caused by cultural factors so that they can effectively negotiate with whomever they please. Thank you for listening.